All right, guys, I'd like to welcome Ian Dewhurst. Ian, thanks for joining us.
No worries, mate. Thanks for having me.
Now, Ian has got a real broad approach and a real broad background that he can bring to the table here. So basically, Ian is a top level at the highest level Australian track athlete, also a physiotherapist. So a real good mix of backgrounds there. Ian, for those people who don't know you well, can you give us a bit of an overview into your background as an athlete and as a coach, please?
Yep. I started running little A's when I was 10 years old, and I was originally back in Sydney. Then I was fortunate enough to progress through a number of different events and find a bit of success here and there with some and not with others. And over the years, found my way into 400-meter hurdles. I was fortunate enough to represent Australia for the first time in 2013 over in Russia at the World University Games, which was a pretty incredible experience, and the first time that I've really been able to travel with the sport. And that sort of set up a good platform for me to leverage from over the next few years. And I've now represented Australia at two Commonwealth Games, Glasgow and the Gold Coast, which were just incredible experiences and a fantastic thing to achieve. I am also a physiotherapist, as you mentioned, so I think the two go very well together. I've got a good understanding of what my body's doing from a physio point of view, but also understand that we can't just, when niggles come up, stop training altogether and do nothing, which a lot of athletes get frustrated with. So combining the two, that sort of knowledge of, I guess, exercise prescription and the way the body moves and the way the body responds to training with my athletic background has really held me in good stead. In terms of coaching, I've had a few athletes over the years that I've worked with. A lot of my running-based stuff tends to come through individuals that will see me for physio initially, and they'll be runners or athletes that'll be looking for, I guess, a bit more of a running or track-based approach to rehab. And so I take them on and go through the rehab process with them, and it often ends up, culminating in some coaching or some advice towards the end of that in terms of mechanics or technique, whatever it happens to be. So it's sort of a nice little group of skills and a good little community of people around me, and it works well.
I think it's a really good way to create a niche. If you have two or more areas of specialisation, it's the point at which those two circles overlap and intersect, and that's where you can really bring a lot of value.
Absolutely. It's I've seen quite a few athletes that have perhaps been treated by physios in the past, and not bad physios, very knowledgeable people, but perhaps just didn't quite have that same passion and understanding of what runners need. And that's sort of been, I guess, a bit of an advantage for me in the industry, whether it be coaching or physio. It's really sort of helped having the background in both.
Cool. So although you're a specialist athlete, I know you've had some exposure to the CrossFit sort of methodology. A lot of the people who'll be watching or listening to this little chat now will have a CrossFit sort of background.
Absolutely.
So you've obviously treated CrossFitters as a physiotherapist and been exposed to some of those methodologies. How do you see your area of specialisation in terms of running? How do you see that integrating into CrossFit?
Yeah, I think so. Obviously, you guys do some running. You don't just quit running altogether. So from a mechanics and running improvement point of view, obviously I've got a few things which I'd be interested in addressing with the guys that are coming along to the camp. I think as well, a lot of movements in CrossFit do have a correlation with running. So we spoke the other day about, for example, triple extension when you're squatting. Squats are a massive part of CrossFit. In running, triple extension is just as important. So that sort of hip, knee, ankle, we're all about sort of that drive phase and getting the most out of our movement. So I think there are a few areas in track and field or in running specifically that do correspond with CrossFit movements. Plenty of crossover there.
I guess there's a commonality, and it doesn't matter what sport you're talking, but you're still trying to produce the same ground reaction forces, and whether that is to lift a barbell over your head or to move your body over 400 meters worth of hurdles, it's still the same basic biomechanics of human movement, isn't it?
Exactly right. And we're trying to be really, really specific as well with the movement. So anyone can sort of drop down and do a squat or go for a bit of a jog, but in terms of getting the most out of our performance and sort of building our bodies as a machine and fine-tuning it as good as we can, it's bloody important to get all those little 1%ers right.
It's about doing it well.
Doing it well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So seeing how you and your sort of contemporaries and peers from a track and field background train, and seeing how CrossFitters train, is there a single biggest thing that you think a CrossFitter, a general sort of CrossFitter is maybe neglecting in their training when it comes to running?
Yeah, I think there's probably a couple of things. Some of the, I guess, more important ones would be, we tend to see, I won't say bad, but perhaps not as good single leg stability with CrossFitters or people that do generally a lot of lifting. A lot of Olympic lifts, for example, are 2 feet on the ground. So and running is primarily a one-footed sport. So that single leg stability tends to lack in those that do a lot of lifting. We also see they don't quite have the same mobility around the hip. So whether it's a forward tilted pelvis or a femur or a hip that's externally rotated, that limits running quite a bit, referring back to that triple extension phase that we go through. And for CrossFitters or for squatting, for example, you need to open those hips up to get in the positions. But for running, the positions are slightly different, and we often see a bit of a deficiency there when it comes to running. Also, CrossFitters / lifters in general tend to be a bit more top heavy and a bit more stiff through the trunk and through the shoulders. When we're running, we need to be quite liquid and smooth through the upper back and the shoulders. If we're not, we tend to rotate the trunk quite a bit, and that rotation then changes pelvic positioning and obviously leads to an area of weakness in terms of driving force down through the ground. They're probably some of the main areas that I would look at.
Yeah, cool. Obviously, doing more running would make a CrossFitter a better runner. That's assuming that they've got the correct technique and biomechanics and stuff. But aside from more running making a CrossFitter better at running, how else is more of that going to help them to be a generalist CrossFit athlete? Yeah,
so I think running's just hard work. Running is hard work, and I think for one, it helps with conditioning. So whether you're doing a speed session or a lactic-based session or an endurance session, that all still transfers across into CrossFit. So I think more broadly, training an energy system in a different mode. Variety in terms of with programming, variety is incredibly important, and you don't always have to squat to get good at squats. You can do other, whether it's lunges, step ups, they all work similar muscle groups. So I think running in general provides a good base of conditioning for CrossFitters. And it also helps with mobility as well. So it's a slightly different mobility perhaps to what someone's doing when they're doing a pull up or a push up or whatever it happens to be, but it's still a very, very general and broad mobility based exercise.
Yeah, I know that running's often talked about as the sort of gold standard of energy expenditure, and when it's compared to something that's lower impact like cycling or something where your body weight is being supported like swimming, it always comes up far and away ahead of those sort of modes of exercise. So it would make sense that we choose what is a more highly demanding energy expenditure form of exercise to train these different systems of work capacity and stuff.
Absolutely, and I think especially if you've got certain targets and goals to reach, running is one of those ones where you can't hide. If you've got to run 100 meters, or if you've set up a program where you've got to run repeat hundreds in 15 seconds over and over, you can't hide. You've got to get them in 15 seconds, and
you either do it or you don't.
You either do it or you don't. And I think having that objective measure is really good for performance. Yes, some people could probably improve with some technique modifications, but at the end of the day, you got to get the 100 in that time or whatever distance it happens to be.
So I don't think there are any arguments that CrossFitters probably should be running more and should definitely be running better. But it's easy just to say, all right, just add a half-hour run 3 times a week on top of your program. And then suddenly you've got CrossFitters who are now doing an extra 90 minutes a week of exercise. Then they're adding their extra gymnastics work and then their swimming and adding some powerlifting and stuff in there as well. And it becomes more on top of more on top of more. And as you know, with a physio background, that's going to cause more problems than it's going to solve. Right. So how can we take a CrossFitter now who is doing, let's call it an hour and a half or 2 hours a day of training? How can we take this athlete, still have them doing an hour and a half or 2 hours of training, and have them running more? How can we include this in their programming more without just adding more on top of more?
Yeah, I think it's I think supplementing exercises that are using similar muscle groups or training in a similar way to running. So whether that, whether you start to then sacrifice a little bit of the rowing, or you sacrifice a bit of cycling, or whatever it happens to be, and combine that with some running, or work some running into the circuit so that the volume stays reasonably similar, but you're just getting a bit more running in there. I think that's a suitable target. You said it perfectly, that if you keep adding volume on top of volume, eventually things break, and that's something that obviously CrossFitters and any athlete needs to be very aware of. But I think running, supplementing it with other exercises is probably the best way to go.
Yeah, cool. And it's not adding more on top of more. It's saying, well, we're still training the energy systems. We're still getting the intent of this session. So
I think it's just being smart with what you're doing as well, and making sure that, as you said, you're working the right energy system. Certain, depending on what comp's coming up or what targets those athletes have, they might find that they're lacking a bit of speed or they're lacking a bit of endurance, and that's when you sort of start to program effectively and go, well, do I want to go out and do a 30-minute run, or will I benefit from doing some shorter, faster sprints in this circuit, or whatever it happens to be?
I think there's a real opportunity here to pick your brain on some of the sort of habits and characteristics, I guess, of top-level track athletes. Obviously, being one yourself, and you've spent a lot of time at Games and training camps and at the Institute of Sport, and you're immersed in this community of people, excuse me, who operate at a very high level and who function at a very high level. Are there any habits that really stand out that these people have, these top-level world-class track athletes have, that you don't see in CrossFitters? Are there any things that CrossFitters could learn from this population where you spend so much of your time?
I think if you're comparing elite track and field athletes to elite CrossFitters, the similar sort of patterns are there, just like if we compared it to elite swimmers or elite cyclists. I think comparing elite athletes from any sport, they've got certain characteristics that get them there. I think the difference is seen when we compare an elite to a sub-elite athlete across varying sports, and the guys at the top tend to be very self-driven, and they know what they need to do to be there. The camps, for example, Commonwealth Games, you go into the village and there's a lot of distractions. You've got a new dining hall, you've got games rooms, you've got pool, you've got all this stuff there that would be great to go in and just have a nice 2-week holiday in there. And you sometimes see the younger athletes, or perhaps the less experienced athletes, they'll be overawed by it all, and they'll get distracted and they'll go and make the most of all these facilities, whereas the best of the best, they'll go in and nothing changes. They eat the same foods, they train at the same times, they do the exact same program that they were doing prior to going into the village, and nothing changes. They've got their pattern, they've got their program to go through. They focus on that and keep doing what they know. So I think the best athletes, they're disciplined, they're direct, they know exactly what they're doing, and they don't get distracted as easily. Yeah,
I like it. It's that ability to try and resist those shiny objects, or here's a new training methodology that someone else is introducing. It's working for them. I need to go and do this. It's about having that trust in what you're doing and saying, well, I know it's working. It's got me to this point.
Exactly right.
If something's working, I'm going to keep doing it.
Yeah, and I don't think that means that we can't. Just because something works, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the best way. I think it's still important to consider other ways of doing things, but we also need to be effective in the way we evaluate those alternative measures. And just because athlete A is doing something that works and athlete B does the same thing, it's not necessarily going to work for both. So I think being disciplined, but also being effective in evaluating new ways of training is important.
Yeah. in terms of incorporating these new, more novel ways of training, maybe things that athletes haven't done before, but again on this theme of not trying to overload people and just adding more volume on top of volume, is there something that the people listening or watching this can take away that's just like a really small thing they can do? What's the 80-20 rule here? Is there a 20% that they can do which is going to give 80% of the results when it comes to running?
Is there a 20%? You know me. I'm not there's no quick fix. My mind. So there's no easy way. There's no one thing that you can do that's going to necessarily lead to an enormous amount of change. There's lots of 1%ers to tick off along the way.
Okay, so let me rephrase it then. So if someone's listening to this and you've now convinced them that they need to run more, that it's going to benefit them as a CrossFit athlete, starting from next week, what is the first thing that they should be doing?
First of all, they need to run.
Cool. So
quite simply.
Yeah, just run.
So I'm not going to say that I guarantee most people go out and run, and technique-wise, maybe it's not the best. Maybe they don't do the best particular session or whatever it happens to be, but you can't be good at running without running.
Yeah.
So I think the programming needs to be looked at or modified or adjusted or considered to allow points in the program to include running, if that makes a bit of sense. So need to find areas where running can be included in the program.
Yep.
And then once that's been established, then addressing, I guess, where the weaknesses are and sort of having someone biomechanically assess or technique-wise assess or go through and say, we've got this section that's allocated to running in our program. Now let's make sure that we do it well. If you don't allocate time for it, though, then it probably won't happen.
Yeah. I think that's really good, and I think that's refreshing to a point, because so many people are so fixated on that quality and on that real perfection. And again, it's important, but sometimes being perfect is not being optimal. And
if you look at a lot of elite athletes start out as kids, whether they're 10 years old, 12 years old, whatever it happens to be. None of them are very good in terms of technique.
Yeah.
They might be a bit stronger than other kids, or they might have a stronger energy system than others, but technique-wise, none of them are perfect elite athletes, but they still start running, they still get into it, they get involved, and with that training, with that exposure, they start to evolve into
further and
more
further
technically efficient athlete.
Yeah.
It takes time, and unless you start doing it, you won't get anywhere.
I think some people have a tendency to let perfect be a barrier to being good, and they spend so long trying to be perfect that they never actually get good at something. So I think it's good advice. Just run, and it doesn't matter how far, it doesn't matter how it looks initially. I mean, you can improve that as you go, but just get on a track,
And you won't know what's wrong until you have a go.
Yeah.
So
cool.
Until you go out and run, you don't know if your foot's landing in the right place. You don't know if you're rotating through the trunk. You don't know what your strengths and weaknesses are until you actually get out there and run. So
perfect.
Have a go, identify the problems, fix the problems.
Cool. Obviously, coming from very much an endurance sort of based background, you have a different perspective on how to train and test fitness as well. Now, if you were to put together an event for the CrossFit Games, so you are trying to test the people who are claiming to be the fittest on earth across the board, and you're maybe trying to expose some stuff that's not otherwise tested, to really say, well, okay, if we're going to call you the fittest on earth, we want you guys to prove it. And to do that, you have to be able to do ... If you were going to write an event for the CrossFit Games, what would that be?
Is this from more of a running perspective?
Sure. Yeah.
So I've got, I'm a little bit biased. So I would.
That's a good thing though, because I want you to be biased, because I want this to be coming from your background, from your expertise. Yeah.
It would involve a lot of running, obviously.
Yeah,
and my niche in 400 meter hurdles is a particular energy system. It's not really that aerobic endurance side, but at the same time, it's not that ATP real fast system. Yep. It lays in between. So
it's so painful.
It's bloody painful.
Yeah.
I would include a session, again, very running based, but it's a session that I've done a number of times, and elite 400 meter runners around the world do it. and it became very, very popular with Kathy Freeman. We call it the Kathy Freeman session sometimes, and it's 5 200s, and you have diminishing recovery. So after the first one is 5-minute recovery, and then it's 4-minute recovery, 3-minute recovery, 2-minute recovery. We always start in the same spot. So on a 400-meter track, for example, you will have a 200-meter run, and then initially you've got 5 minutes to get back across to the start, which is fine. When you've got 2 minutes and you're absolutely buggered, it's pretty hard to get back across to the start. That session, you're really working it. You got to be hitting your reps at 95%. So you're getting close to redlining right from the beginning. And the goal is to be consistent. So if you hit, for example, 25 for the first one, then 25 again, then a 25, and then a 27, and then a 29, the session hasn't been done properly. But if you can hit 26 every single time, you've done it right. So it's about trying to smash the body, get some fatigue through the legs, but move quickly and consistently and maintain it for an extended period of time. I've had a few guys, a few mates of mine come and do that session with me, guys that spend a lot of time in the gym and work out quite a lot. None of them have been able to hold those consistent times, whether it's because they go too hot at the beginning or because they don't quite have the conditioning to hold the pace at 95% the whole way through. But it's a bloody hard session. So I
like it. I think it's good as well because although it is very running centric, you're testing speed in there, like obviously because it's a short 200. You're testing recoverability, which covers their ability to buffer hydrogen ions from the blood. It's not purely anaerobic, although a 200-meter run on its own would be.
Yes, yeah, exactly right. That's why it's so hard. So there's very few people that have all the components at 100% to do it beautifully. Usually they're lacking somewhere. I'm not a perfect athlete. There's areas that I could be better at, or and strengths that I have, and you try and play to your strengths as much as possible. But it's usually towards the end of the session where your weaknesses start to be exposed, and they hurt.
That sounds horrible.
I recommend it though. I recommend it. Have a go.
Yeah, cool. Is there anything that we haven't talked about, Ian, or anything that we haven't touched on that you'd like to talk about?
No, I think that's the bulk of it. So obviously with this camp, I think we'll have maybe an hour or so. You mentioned some running stuff. So my goal initially would be, it's not quite long enough to go through an awesome warm up and an awesome session and get everything, but certainly touching base on those earlier mechanical things we addressed. So having a look at positioning of the hips, foot placement, things like that with athletes, that can make a huge difference. And if we can sort of choose one or two things on the athletes in the camp that they can then take away and work with, I think that'll be a huge positive. And everyone's going to be a little bit differently. Some athletes are going to have will need corrections around the hip. Some are going to be upper body. Some are going to be lower body. We'll try and individualise it as much as possible and make it very specific and tailored to each athlete.
Cool. Excellent. So, as you mentioned, this is the athlete camp that we've got coming up September 2018, and we're lucky enough to have you as our running subject matter expert there. When our attendees leave that camp, so they've done that session, that module with you on running, what's the biggest thing they're going to take away, or is this individualised based on the faults that you see?
Yeah, I think I'd like to individualise it as much as possible, because I don't think we can just give a simple generic prescription to everyone. So I'll individualise it as much as possible. But I'd like every athlete to sort of walk away with, as I said, one or two things that they can just sort of write down in the diary and go, this is what I need to work on. There's no point having 15 different things to fix up, because you're going to spend 1% of your time on each one and you won't get anywhere. So one or two really good quality areas where they can sort of make a big change or a big difference to the way that they run, and they can sort of take that away and work with it however they like. But as long as that's identified, it gives them the opportunity to do that. Yeah,
perfect. I can't wait. I think there's going to be so much value in this. And again, it's such a low-hanging fruit. A couple of small 1%ers, as you say, and those 1%ers can sort of extrapolate out to big major things in the long run.
Exactly right. I think touching base on what you said as well about what do elite athletes do better? They target the 1%ers.
Yeah.
So that's where the money lies. They target those 1%ers and they get them all right, and that's what separates the elite from the not quite as elite.
I love it. Cool. So before we say goodbye, firstly, how can people get in touch with you if they have any questions as a follow up from this chat? And secondly, how can the guys out there follow your progress as you're working towards, I guess, Olympic Games is next target?
Yeah, so Tokyo's definitely the target. These next 2 years are going to be pretty big ones for me. So at the moment, I'm just working in sort of off-season training. There's no races for quite a little while. World Champs isn't until October next year. So I'll be racing around Europe most likely next year, next winter, the next Australian winter, and the year after that, trying to put together some good races and chase that qualifier for Tokyo, which would be pretty awesome. In terms of getting in touch, you guys can definitely email me with any running-based stuff at ian@4motionphysio.com. And as well, just give me a follow on social media. So just Ian.Dewhurst on Instagram is probably the best way. And I try to get a few sort of running-based pics up there, but Perfect. It's social media keeps you busy.
It does indeed, yeah. Tell me about it. All right, mate. That was excellent. I think there are heaps of takeaways there, and obviously you would have helped to convince a lot of people that they should be running more, but not only that, but given some actual practical advice as to here is how you begin to implement it. And I think for me, the biggest takeaway was don't overthink it. Just put some shoes on, get outside and run. Yeah.
Make a start.
Start somewhere. Perfect. Cool, mate. Really appreciate you taking the time for this. I think it's been really valuable. I look forward to doing some work with you at the athlete camp. Thanks for having the chat.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. I look forward to seeing you.
Thanks, Ian. Cheers.
Cool. No worries, mate.